I'm Phillipa McCormack, a legal researcher from the University of Adelaide Law School. We've had this really great series of questions from a whole bunch of different people about climate protests, about whether the government recognises them, about whether they make a difference. And it's such an important question, and it's a way that young people can get involved. I think there are 4 reasons why protests can be really important, and one of those is policy making. But before we get to that, the kinds of protests we're talking about, they include individual protests like Greta Thunberg not going to school once a week to protest against climate change, and the movement she started, the school strikes for climate action, which saw young people all over Australia and all over the world not going to school to show voting people, grown-ups, that they really cared. But it also extends to gluing people's hands to walls, chaining themselves to bulldozers and throwing soup on paint. There are 4 really important reasons why these kinds of protests can be important. The first is psychological. It's a sense of empowerment. It helps us to see that we're joining together with other people, sometimes all over the world, to actually do something about the threat, about the thing that we're worried about. There are social benefits. It helps us to overcome hopelessness and despair and to build community solidarity and enthusiasm. There's media. So the more people protest and get involved, the more media coverage they get. And that can help to share the message of why we're protesting, about the urgent timeline for action, and about the consequences of failing to act. And that's really important. And then the final benefit of protests is politics. And the answer to your question is yes. Protests can make a difference to politics, and governments do notice. So we saw, for example, a whole new form of environmental protection in Australia coming out of a huge protest in Tasmania back in the 80s, when the Tasmanian government proposed to essentially dam the Franklin River. People went out into the wilderness area, they linked arms, they chained themselves to bulldozers, they protested. And the government listed that area. It was the first place in Australia to be listed as World Heritage to protect it from that dam. Protests could create the same kind of change for climate protection. We saw some of that in the last national election, where a whole bunch of candidates, they called themselves teal candidates, came into the new parliament specifically to address and bring climate goals to the attention of the parliament. It's a start, and protests were part of that process. So yes, keep protesting.